The title of our particular presentation this morning is this afternoon is Change the Conversation to Change Your Business and Shape Your Culture. And one of the things I've been thinking about since I've been listening to everyone who's been speaking so far, it's all about how you shape a culture by changing the way people converse within your culture. We're seeing a lot on the global stage where we're seeing no conversation and we're seeing these dueling monologues. And I think in business, we have an opportunity to change that. And that for me is critically important. I'm Rose Fass. This is Martha Delahanty, and we're delighted to be with you this afternoon. It says here that I'm the founder and chairman of Fast-Forward Consulting Group and the author of 2 leadership books, and that's all good and well. But for the past 45 plus years, I've spent a lot of time in corporate. My last job was in a Fortune 50 company as the chief transformation officer. And in those days, quite frankly, they did not know what transformation meant. It wasn't in the lexicon. I had many of my leaders asking me, what does this mean, Rose? Because I had been a region president managing a P&L for most of my career. So it was like, okay. I said, I guess if you don't change, you're under arrest. I later left with Bill McDermott to go to Gartner. Bill McDermott is now the CEO of ServiceNow and started the Center for Business Transformation there. And when I went to that job, I went kicking and screaming, but it became the foundation for the business that I have today with several wonderful people. My colleague, my British colleague that I started with, I met at Gartner. He's a classically trained engineer. I'm a general manager, and we have now 20 plus people, and we work globally, and it's all about being the how company. We really felt from the very beginning that with all of the big consulting firms, we learned a lot. Most of the time we were given the what, and somewhere along the line, we were missing the why and the how. And so we became very focused on making sure that everybody that got hired at Fast Forward was an operator, had been in a real position and job, had faced quarterly reviews, quarterly business reviews, ops reviews, and therefore could be hands-on and really be able to help people with the how. Martha Delahanty was one of my very first clients, and God bless her, my guinea pig client, who allowed us to experiment and do a lot. And for the past 2+ decades, I mean, we've been in two decades together. It's been incredible. So I'd like to introduce Martha, who will later tell you more about herself, but go ahead, Mark.
Sure, Rose, great to be here. And I can't wait to get to the meat of this conversation. Listen, when I met Rose, I was promoted to the CHRO of Verizon Wireless, where we had about 30,000 people. We were growing to 90,000. I was over promoted, I think before my time. And I went from being really good at something, and many of you will know there's 68 people. I'm sure this has happened where you go from being great at a job to you're promoted, and next thing you know, you suck. And I will tell you, Rose, we will hear this through this session. People obey pain. I was in a level of pain, and I was blessed enough to meet Rose, and we've forged a great friendship and partnership over the years. So that's it for now, Rose.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And the invite here really intrigued me, because how do you build a healthy, inclusive, and durable culture? And that's not an easy feat. But I wanted to share a little bit, because I had a lot of senior executives that were always saying to me, what is this amorphous thing, culture? And why does everybody talk about it in such esoteric ways? And I finally said to them, it's the environment you operate in. The operating environment is defined by the way people work and interact with one another. Simply put, my anthropologist told me, Rose, it's how we do things around here. And I loved what the woman said about you either have a culture, a toxic culture, or don't have one. You can have one by default. It's how you do things around here. And if they're chaotic, they're chaotic, you know? So today we are reimagining how we communicate to transform our business and shape our culture. Everything is a conversation, and communication, everything communicates. The text message, the clothes you've got on, the way you appeared on Zoom, whether you raised your hand or not, everything communicates. How we embrace and harness the power of diverse thinking. There's so much emphasis in D&I on gender and ethnicity, and we never think about the fact that people think differently. And are we embracing that? Are we giving people the opportunity to participate in their way and not just ours? How we build a workplace where everyone thrives. Because when everyone thrives, guess what? The business thrives. There's no big science in all of this. So 2 decades ago, I started a conversation with Martha. And by the way, I used to tell Martha all the time, I never learned from insight, Mark. I obey pain. I learned by making every mistake. I'd been in business for 45 plus years. I remember telling my first boss, I want to do all the right things, but I'm not. I'm trying to do everything right. He said, don't. Do a few of the right things. Yeah. So 2 decades ago, I started this conversation with Martha that began to change my business as much as it changed hers. And we used to refer to it as Mascara with Martha, because we had these little conversations at 7 o'clock in the morning. And for you ladies that know, we had to put on our mascaras and, look good for the day. So at any rate, I am now going to let Martha tell you about what happened.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rose. And so we started 20 plus years ago. I had become a newly anointed CHRO and really had to pivot from being a functional expert to building the culture across the company. And it was of a Fortune 15 company, and it was quite a ride. So when I moved into that role, we needed to get our top leaders to think about how they think and open their minds to really 4 leadership principles. And those leadership principles were around reframing the conversation. And we're going to talk a bit on how we did this, but we knew this was the end state. People were talking past each other. We needed to reframe the way we saw our business, and our goal was to move to unprecedented growth, market-changing growth, career-bending growth.
So the conversations that Martha is speaking about were around the idea of vision conversations, conversations for possibility, ethics conversations, conversations for commitment, courage conversations, conversations for action, reality conversations, conversations for planning, and facts. So I wanted to take you through this just to give you a little bit of a view of this tool that Fast Forward uses all the time. When we think about ethics, and the largest percentage of people fall into this category, it's about valuing people and earning trust. We all think that's a good thing, right? Vision is about thinking big and new. As leaders, we're always asked and tasked to do that. Courage is about taking charge and making bold moves. Not always easy, but for leaders who have really changed the conversation in their businesses, and you can look back at Alan Mulally and Ford, Lou Gerstner back in the day in IBM, Jack Welch, Marley, all the different people that you have learned to look at and admire. It's about taking charge and making bold moves. And then reality, about really focusing on data and what is. We need all 4 of these things. It's extremely difficult to do all 4. Most of us really emphasize 2, and we let the other 2 kind of fall back. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But at any rate, in ethics, this is the should be of leadership. It then invites conversations for commitment. And this is where the leader serves and describes the why. You often hear people say, why are we doing this? In vision, this is about thinking big and new. And it's the could be of leadership. So if one is the should be, this is the could be. This then encourages conversations for possibility. Not everybody wants to participate in those conversations. This is where the leader inspires and sets direction. And we all need to do that. And it describes the what. And it offers inspiration and hope and defines what's important. So now we got the should be, the could be, the why, and the what. We go over here to courage and we say, if we're taking charge and making bold moves, it's the will be of leadership. You think back to Winston Churchill, we will not surrender. It's all about the will be. This is conversations that drive bold action. This is about we're the leader, exercises the will and champions the idea, the people, the facts, and sets the when. This is, when are we going to do this? So you'll often hear people say, what are we going to do? Why are we going to do that? When did you expect this to get done? And then lastly, it is about doing what's difficult. And it's where the leader is willing to take risk. And that's not always easy. So as we continue along, reality. The least amount of the population of all around the world that we've done this tool with, and it's a very simple tool, people fall into this reality category, focusing on data and what is. And it's a critical aspect of leadership. It's just knowing when it needs to come in. So the leadership reality encourages conversations for facts and assessment. Where the leader exercises, where the leader executes, describes the how, and puts together the plan. So when you look at this, you say to yourself, okay, why, what, when, and how? And we need all four of these. But in these conversations, and when we do this tool, people tend to lean into two, and the other two kind of fall away. So Martha experienced this throughout our journey, and we'll share a little bit about that as we go on. Martha, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Sure. So we knew we had a great framework, the language, if you will, and introducing that common language across an organization. So we launched this through a program that was designed as a hands-on experience. We led with the strategy of the business to give credibility, of course, at building the business, cross-functional teams to make sure that we addressed the silos that naturally existed in work, addressing some of the internal competition. How many times do we have the guns pointing in when we have to remind everybody that the competition's on the outside? And frankly, a lack of teamwork. We really needed to drive this shift toward greater collaboration, stronger and better conversations that led to growth. We called it Realize. And we called it Realize because we wanted to realize our full potential. How many of you have been in working situations and you go, man, we got the right bones here, but we just haven't realized our full potential? This program that we launched, that also through the experience introduced the thinking patterns in a really clever way without it becoming like, take your head off, lobotomy off and go do a learning and then go back and do the real work. It was embedded in the work, embedded in the flow of work, and it really changed the conversation.
And what I loved about this is Martha got the CEO to kick off every meeting, and it was wonderful. He came in and he basically set the direction as always, and people began to realize that Mr. Finance was not Dr. No. The IT guy wasn't stopping them from getting things accomplished. Marketing wasn't driving ahead of sales. When we brought everybody in the room together and they started to work on real problems, and we picked out 3 or 4, if you remember, Mark, real problems, and they used the thinking patterns to kind of work through that. And in the end, the entire executive team came in and they would make a presentation on their findings. What I loved about this is Gavin, my engineer partner, used to refer to this as the Thursday to Monday gap. You left Realize on Thursday, and Monday you could apply it right away. Because we've all been in these learnings, guys, where you have a day job, a night job, and now we got this fake job. And where do we go from here? So we decided no fake jobs. We're going to make this real. And everybody kind of really appreciated it and loved it. So we changed the conversation throughout the company, and it began to change the business. And I'm going to turn it back over to Martha.
Sure. And when we did this, it was not a one and done big bang, but you started to see the conversations shift and really using the tools that were introduced. And as an HR leader, listen, one of our biggest obligations is to make sure that we have the talent now and the talent in the future from a succession perspective. What I also saw is that this concept around thinking patterns elevated the conversation and elevated the talent And we were ready. We were ready when there was one CEO move and it ripple effect almost opened 1,500 jobs as people moved in different roles. And we were ready. The teams were ready. Our leaders were ready to take on that larger scale and larger scope. And I think that is the most important thing, to make sure you're ready for your growth now, ready for the headwinds and the tailwinds.
And it was wonderful to see some of those leaders that were in the first Realize become executives. I mean, it was really amazing. And Mark, this was a
listen.
Lots of mascara with Martha's over this one.
Yeah. So listen, after 20 some years, I left Verizon, actually became the CHRO of Commvault, which was a much different motion. I had done big, telecom. And that was a courageous move and one of a leap of faith. And I will tell you, this is what the company was like when we first started. It was a brand new CEO, and he's fabulous. He was a new CEO coming in right after an activist investor. We had our stock was at $36. We wished it were higher. We had already had one activist investor in the stock, and our leadership team was lacking diversity in gender, ethnicity, and experience. So we really needed to shift the business. We were shifting from a software solution to a SaaS solution, not unlike many of us are shifting today, as we were hearing about earlier with introducing AI and generative AI. Those are all those shifts.
And Martha came in, hired as a new CHRO, and also by a new CEO. So people were, kind of lamenting the previous CHRO and the previous CEO. And that's never easy when you're coming in as sort of the new interloper.
So a lot happened along the way, but the first thing my boss said is, hey, I have a small remit. Can you attract new leaders? We got to get new people, new blood, and get this team aligned. And that was cool. I think it was March 3rd of 2020. And it was like, okay, sure, I can handle that. It's not that hard. Well, I started on March 3rd and everything changed. On March 9th of 2020, we completely shut everything down and went 100% remote. We're in many, many different countries. And then on March 17th, our second activist investor came in. So when we had this change, what it was that moment in time where we obey pain. So I did pick up the phone and I realized we're wired to follow directions in HR, build a plan, build policies. Historically, I've always looked at, we do the hard stuff. I think what the pandemic came and all of these shifting movements within a business, it was a pivot. It was time for me to step up and shift from doing the hard stuff to doing the courageous stuff. It's very different as an HR leader when you're driving that cleanup aisle 5 work that nobody else wants to do versus having the hard conversations, the courageous conversations. And listen, when business as usual no longer worked, I obeyed pain and I called Rose.
So we were both kind of in pain because, to be honest with you, Fast Forward was for the first time recognizing that we could no longer be live in rooms working with people. So we had to pivot to a completely virtual point of view, a virtual offering, and change our IP in a way that people could engage with us in the same engaging way they did in the rooms and not feel like they were on Zoom gloom and what were we going to do? So she called me to kickstart a leadership initiative, another mascara with Martha moment, as we refer to it. And you gentlemen that are on the phone, I hope you can appreciate this. We were all remote and we felt we needed to start small. Martha and I both said, we can't go in here with a big bang kind of theory because that's going to be a problem, especially since most of her peers she had not met. So Mark, share this a little bit because you know what you were going through at the time.
Sure. We started really similar to the Realize. We started with small group, intact strategy conversations. Really, Fast Forward starts as a strategy firm and thinking about the how company and talking about the business, and then how we bring in the way we work, which is the thinking pieces, and making sure that that is serving us well. And so in these virtual coaching and training, we introduced the assessment you take to gain and glean the thinking patterns. And we did this small group at a time through the lens of my leader's pain, which is making sure they're delivering on their quarter. When we led through that lens, we had that instant credibility. When our leaders started to use the thinking patterns to help get work done, we actually delivered results.
And the nice part, and I hope you're all seeing this, Martha's deeply authentic and real. And so it took a little bit of a while for people to kind of acclimate to the fact that they had a new CEO and a new CHRO, but they started realizing they could pick up the phone and call her anytime, and that she was willing to listen and hear. And we listened to all of them. And, you know, when you do these thinking patterns, what's really great about it is it allows people to kind of see themselves, and people love to be able to see themselves. What I especially like, I've taken every tool in the book, and so has Martha. This is a very simple tool. It's easy to use, and people learn from it very, very quickly, and they were able to start to change some of those conversations. So after 3 long years, Mart, I think it's been 3 years or 2.5 or whatever it's been, here we are.
So it's been quite a journey, team, and by no means is this the only reason why we're seeing a lift. But, you know, we on the HR side take a hit when it's down, so might as well talk about the lift. So here's what Commvault's doing now. We're an incredible world leader in cyber resilience. Our stock has gone from the 30s to 145, $150. That one activist investor's out and they made a lot of money. More importantly, and I think what's even more exciting is what's happening across the organization. We've introduced a SaaS solution and we've grown that ARR to close to $300 million. We started with 0 women in our leadership team and very little diversity on our board or women. And now we have over 50% of my CEO's direct reports are women. And we have more diversity than we've ever had on our board. And every single board, the operating committee, the comp committee, the non-gov are all chaired by either a diverse person or a woman. I say that because we brought the right people to the table and they naturally earned those roles. And we were able to do that by being okay to introduce people who perhaps think slightly differently.
And what's lovely about all of this is, you know, I once had a boss years ago, actually a man of color that I thought the world of, and he was brilliant. And he used to say to me, isn't it strange, Rose, that we have to ask to do this because our customers are diverse? Why are we trying to make a company not diverse? And I totally concur with that. I think you get a lot from different thinking from people who come from different cultures and different ethnicities. So it's a really big deal, be able to do that. So as we became a more diverse leadership team, and we started to shift, as Martha said, from doing the hard things to watching HR do things that took acts of courage, we began to realize that you need a common language. You know, I often think of Winston Churchill in World War II. He was trying to have conversations with Roosevelt about getting involved. And he said, we're 2 countries separated by a common language. And what does that mean? It means we may be all saying the same things, but we may not all be meaning the same things. I wrote a book on this called The Chocolate Conversation, which we'll get into at another time. But truthfully, people mean to say the same things, but they toss past each other. And this tool gave us a common language. And that began to shift us from where we were to where we needed to go. And so, Martha, do you want to share a little bit about this?
Sure. So remember, I was saying small groups at a time, talking about what the leaders needed most, which is support with their strategy, their business initiative, introducing a tool along the way that can help us all meet our plan. And voila, over the course of a couple of years, suddenly we have this great source of data. And we have the thinking patterns across darn near close to all of our employees, or not all, but most of our employees, certainly all of our leadership team. And what this has allowed us to do is, frankly, have a very data-driven decision, which is the love language of my CEO. And I saw that there's a lot of engineers on the call, so there you go. And have this data-driven conversation when we're talking past each other. It actually has created a common language to get unstuck from the common language, if you will. We all say the same thing and mean something different. So we have this great source, and we're going to talk a little bit about how this works, because after 20 some years, I will tell you, I am still a student and not a very good one oftentimes.
And I've been doing it for as many years as since its inception, and helped create it, and frankly, still a student as well. And Nicole, you're 100% right. Nicole chatted in the chat that it's not only getting people from different diverse ways of thinking, but different experiences. And you're 100% right about that, Nicole, because the engineers brought experiences that we needed to hear. They were building use cases for customers. Salespeople needed to understand those use cases, and marketing needed to understand what it was telling them. So what they had to think about in terms of brand advertising and all of the things going forward, and finance in terms of what to invest. So happy to have the engineers on the call and to be talking about conversations. So Martha had this little thing called her Ashley story, and I love it. So Mark, do you want to share a little bit about this?
Sure. Rose and I were thinking a lot about this session, and very excited to share this story. It's a bit vulnerable for me because it's a lot of times of just sharing. I think we all learn more when on the times that we had challenges or failures than we do in the successes. And I think we need to talk more about those challenges and failures so we learn together. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity. By the way, I start I go ethics vision. So I do a lot of should and could. And I called Rose because this amazing woman, I was all excited, hired another executive senior, woman. And I'm like, made a huge mistake. She's not listening to me. And I'm literally saying to Rose, oh my gosh, you need to fix her. And she set me straight. Rose?
So it's not so much setting her straight, but Ashley was hired as the chief strategy officer. And Martha was thinking about the shift that was happening in Commvault from strictly being data backup to being cyber resilient. And she wanted to create this little base camp that would get all the employees on the same page, understanding what this shift meant and what a great thing it was. So she was sort of dreaming on the phone with Ashley. And Ashley was getting nervous, knowing that the strategy was being announced in the not so distant future. So her first words out of her mouth were, well, how many resources are we going to need for this? And what do we actually need to do? And when do you want to do this base camp? And that just got crazy. And Martha got annoyed. And she said, can't I just dream with you, Ashley? I don't know how many resources we're going to need. I don't even know when I'm going to do this. And it doesn't have to be done the minute you announce the strategy. We can do it later. And Ashley was feeling really badly because Martha had hired her. She's like a nice, wonderful woman. And so is Martha. And she's thinking, I'm frustrating her. She doesn't understand where I'm coming from. So I basically said, Martha, you're talking what? She's talking when. She's thinking that this has got to happen sooner rather than later. And it's going to land on her lap. You need to have the conversation about the conversation. You start out by saying, Ashley, I'm going to have a conversation for possibility with you. I don't know how it's going to work, when it's going to happen, nothing. And I'm not asking you to do anything but listen and let me know what your thoughts are. And maybe we can keep the conversation going, because if we do decide to do this, you're the one person that's going to help me get it done. And this is reframing a conversation so you're speaking to someone's listening. And Martha began to realize, and I look at guys, I'm going to tell you, I stand here, I look like, well, don't you know, I'm 75 years old, spent 50 years in business. I have bad conversations and I hate that. And I work on it all the time. So the perspective that I have to give myself regularly is, why did that conversation go poorly? What didn't I do? Because it's the job of the person initiating the conversation to make sure it's framed in a way someone can hear it. So Martha and Ashley had a redo.
Yeah. So I set it up and said, okay. I was a little annoyed that I needed to even set it up. I wasn't even sure why she just wasn't listening to me. See, there you go. That ethics. I'm just saying this because it shows you how these tools really do work. I said, okay, let me just reset. This is the type of conversation where, are you in a headspace where you're able to be a thinking partner with me? And she was like, yes, I can help you with this. I can be a thinking partner. Great. Let's have a thinking partner conversation. And by the way, Rose, there's all kinds of comments on your age in here, and I just love it. Of course it is. So anyway, so yes, that's exactly what it is. I know. It's amazing. Anyway, it was mascara with Martha because I never wore a mascara, and she's like, you need to wear a little more mascara. By the way, that's a sign to say, always have a coach that will tell you the truth. So with that said, we changed that conversation. I'm giving this example because imagine in your businesses, imagine where things go wrong. They don't usually go wrong in a strategy. You got to pick a strategy and stick to it. They don't go wrong even sometimes from the investment perspectives. They go wrong in the how work gets done around here, the culture. And in that culture, or how work gets done around here, it is simply a series of conversations. And what we see is we need to invest not in necessarily the tools or the skill, but the skill set of how to have a productive and meaningful conversation. Your business will be transformed and time will be returned to the right place, which is growing the business. Rose?
And so it's the human element that always moves us forward. I invited the CHRO of North America from Visa to this particular conversation because she's going to be my next favorite woman, Martha. Yay. I met her on a panel and we had a great conversation, and you know, she gets it. And she was talking about conversations that were going on in her company about AI and should we use it, should we not? And it's always difficult in the fintechs to figure that out. And I was sharing with her what this does. When people are in contention with one another, my father spoke all of the Romance languages. He was a Marine and an executive and a published poet. And he used to say to me, Rose, be up at 0600, ready for company. I never understood fully what that meant, except I was dressed and up at 0600. But what it means is be there for the person that's talking to you. And he wanted to learn those Romance languages because he desperately cared that people got heard, listened to, and understood. So he was the child of an immigrant and wanted that. I feel like I have that in me. I care very deeply that someone is heard. And I hate it when someone says something in a room and they may not be at the right level and somebody ignores it. It just drives me crazy because some of the greatest conversations come from people from all walks of life. It's bigger than just the conversations we have at work. You know, it blesses my soul when people will say to me, Rose, this is not only changing the conversation for me at work, but my husband and I are having better conversations, or I'm having better conversations with my son, or I'm having better conversations with my significant other. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter. I mean, we all recognize when, I don't even know why I'm married to the man I married for 46 years. I love him to death, but we never agree. I have to laugh at that, but he will always, and Gavin, who's on the call, my colleague and faithful partner from the beginning, who is a classically trained engineer and a whole lot smarter than I am. He would say to me, you know, Ron is so different, but Ron was a reality-based person. And basically he would say to me, it is what it is. It is what it is. And I would say to him, oh, for goodness sake, can't we do something different? It's also the conversations we have at home. So Martha said to me, you know, Rose, I get this question all the time. How do we manage work-life balance in a post-pandemic world? We talk about Zoom gloom. We talk about all these things. I've heard a lot in the previous presentations on culture and how that gets shaped in a hard-bred world. This is going to sound terribly cavalier, but this was my answer to Martha. It's called being a grown-up. I know if I have to take my son to a doctor, or if I have to go to a particular appointment myself, or we have to be at a soccer game, just do what you have to do. Manage your work schedule. Nobody should be managing someone else's work. And I do think it's called being a grown-up. So I'm going to say this, Martha said it, leadership happens in the conversation. And whether we realize it or not, our job as leaders is to frame the way people see the world and move them to action. Even as non-leaders, even if we're individual contributors and we want something done, frame the way people see the world by having the right conversation so you can move them to action. Because when you change minds, it's because you've changed hearts. And when you do that, you change the conversation. And so at Fast Forward, we believe everything is a conversation. I want to thank you so much for letting Martha and I have this conversation with you. There are 2 books written on it. Martha's in one of them. Martha's in actually both of them. She actually helped me launch the first one. And there are many stories. When you read the book, you'll probably hear us speaking to you. It reads like a story, not like a typical business book, both of them. And they tell you stories of individuals and leaders and the ways in which they have changed by changing the conversation. And with your help, we are hoping that we can keep this conversation going from now until we see you again, and that you can be the change we want to see on the public stage, that we can end this vitriol among our public leaders by we in business being the kind of leaders that know how to have good conversations. Jamie Dimon spoke about this at the Economic Forum. Keep the conversation going, try harder. We all need to be part of the change we want to see in our communities. So love the insights and ahas that you've put in the chat boxes. Would love to hear more. Love you. Talk to you soon.